Thank you for joining the Broadway Drumming 101 podcast with your host, Clayton Craddock.
Welcome back to the Broadway Drumming 101 podcast. My name is Clayton Craddock, and today's guest is Joshua Samuels. Josh and I go way, way back. We met a while ago when I was the drummer for the off-Broadway musical Altar Boyz. He later subbed on the show and many more in his early career in New York City. He networked his way into the Broadway scene and landed the percussion chair multiple times at the Radio City Christmas Spectacular. He also subbed on the Broadway musicals Aladdin, Miss Saigon, Sunset Boulevard, Jersey Boys, Bronx Tale, On the 20th Century, Nice Work If You Can Get It, Chaplin, and Godspell. And he landed his first chair as the percussionist for the Broadway musical Beetlejuice.
Work all night on a drink of rum.
Daylight come and me one go home. Stack banana.
He's an incredible drummer and an excellent networker. I highly recommend listening to what he has to say about meeting people, making the right connections to jumpstart a career, what it takes to be a great sub, and what it's like auditioning and later landing the percussion chair at the Radio City Christmas Spectacular. Look, I can't say enough good things about this guy, so I'm just going to let him tell his story. Ladies and gentlemen, Joshua Samuels. Welcome to Broadway Drumming 101. My name is Clayton Craddock, and today's guest is Josh Samuels. He is the man. He is the king. He is a... I can't say enough good things about him. I say that, I use those words sparingly, but this guy is the man, and you'll find out why right now. Welcome.
First of all, it's that beautiful voice, man. That's why you're getting so much traction with these podcasts. Oh, my goodness.
Thank you, man. It's all those Barry White records I grew up listening to. But I won't be speaking like that to you.
Oh, I love it, please. It gets me in the mood.
Play a flam, my brother. Play a flam. Flamadiddles are what turns me on. Stop. Hey, man. So I know you live in New Jersey now. Did you grow up in New Jersey?
No, sir. I grew up in Los Angeles. I grew up in California.
Oh, really?
I grew up in California. I was very fortunate at a young age because, my uncle is was the late, great Dave Samuels, who passed away. Unfortunately, it was a little over a year ago, maybe almost 2 years now. But I was very fortunate he lived in, New York, Connecticut while I was growing up, but he would often come around with a lot of his projects, the Caribbean Jazz Project, stuff that he was doing in California. And I would get lessons from him at a very, very young age. He was teaching me vibes and mallets and theory. Oftentimes I think about those times and, I was real young, 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. And sometimes I think to myself, man, I really wish I had paid a little bit more attention, because that guy was the master, and he was just, he would try to teach me theory things and I would just listen and look at him and go, but you're a kid. So I try to honor him as much as I can and, be the best musician I can be.
Watching him play was your first musical memory? Like, what was the thing that, was that the thing that said, you know what, I want to play drums and percussion?
No, actually, when I started when I was very young, my mom got me lessons on drum set when I was 2.5. I started playing. And I was in this dance and singing group that toured around California when I was about 3, 4, 5. I was doing these singing shows as like a young kid with this dance and jingle group for children. And it was really early on about then that I knew that I was going to be a performer. The difference is that it's a very interesting story because I was always, there were always two sides of Josh. There was the musician side, which was always playing drums, playing piano, playing music, etc. And then there was performing. And all throughout my life, there were two separate things. There was like me on stage, and then there was me in doing orchestra, drums, bands, all that stuff. And it wasn't until very late in life, not late in life, but later on, that I realized that that was my calling, that I should actually put them together. Because, you know, in middle school, high school, I was doing all the honor orchestras, and I got to play with the LA Phil. When I was in high school, there was like an LA Phil honor orchestra that I got to play in. But during that time, I was also on stage, you know, doing community theater, doing, you know, shows at my high school. And you know, I wasn't a very good performer. I mean, I wasn't a great singer, I should say. But you know, I loved it. I loved doing it. And you know, even in high school, I remember all of my friends in the bands and orchestras, they'd be in the pit and I'd be on stage. And it never occurred to me, never occurred to me to think, oh, you know, maybe I should be in the pit playing the music. It was just always separate. And then it was the same thing in college. I would do shows and I would play in the orchestra and play in my bands. And then when I got to after college, I started working on cruise ships. And when I worked on cruise ships, well, to be honest, the quality of musicianship on the cruise ships wasn't very high. And because of that, I became music director of the entire ship at like 21. But that was when I realized, because that's when, you know, the bands were playing in the pits, and I started playing in the pits for the shows, and I went, my God, this is my calling. This is what I'm supposed to do, because I was really good at music and I loved performing, and this was the perfect avenue for me. I went, wow, I can play my favorite shows, perform, and still be a part of theater and do what I do best.
And that's how you got Beetlejuice. Thank you for.
That's right. That's right. Yep. The next day.
Next day, you moved to New York, got Beetlejuice. Thank you for joining me on Broadway. Man, sped through your life real quick. Hold on 1 second. Hold on.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, but that's fascinating. Though there's a lot that you said there. 2.5 is when you got your first drum set?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
My God.
I couldn't reach the pedals.
What's that?
Couldn't reach the pedals.
Did it have like paper heads on it, or were they actually Remo drum?
No, it was a real kit. It was like a real like Tama Junior kit, but I couldn't even reach the pedals.
Wow.
You know, and my mom would just teach me paradiddles. She says it to this day. She says, I remember when you were 3, right, left, right, left, right, left, left. I'm like, okay, thanks, Mom. Thanks.
Is she a musician too?
She's a singer and a guitar player. I mean, she's not for a living, but yeah. Oh, yes. My very musical family. Very musical.
Did you have specific drummers that you looked up to when you were younger? Like so top 5 drummers that you looked up to when you were younger, and you're either, you know, junior high or high school.
Wow, interesting.
I know it probably evolved, but
oh, it definitely evolved. I mean, when I was in middle school, everybody was into like, you know, we were all into like the fusion drummers, man. Like when I was growing up, we were listening to Vinnie Colaiuta and Steve Gadd and Dennis Chambers. I remember reading all about Dennis Chambers on Modern Drummer. Man, I used to get every single Modern Drummer. I used to sit in my room and just read through those, try to like play some of the grooves. Do they still have that magazine?
Yes, they do. This one of the reasons why I'm doing this is because I think I might have told you in 1981, they had a Broadway Drummers Roundtable. And that was 40 years ago. And I was like, 40 years ago in August. And I was like, why don't they have something like that now?
Absolutely.
And now we do.
Absolutely.
So hopefully we'll have something in Modern Drummer moving forward with more features with Broadway drummers. But yes, I used to have excuse me. I used to have a subscription as well. You know, mine started kind of when they first started, kind of like I think they started in 77, 78. I had one in like 79, all the way through like the 90s. Then I gave all of my, I think I had them in Connecticut at my parents' house, and I gave them to a colleague of ours, and spreading the knowledge to other people. But yes, modern drummery. So you were reading it back in was that the 80s, 90s?
No, yeah, maybe late 80s, early 90s, middle school, high school.
Okay.
Oh, I loved that, man. I loved that magazine. What a great resource for us.
Did you play
before the internet?
Did you play in any like fusion bands back then?
Yeah, oh yeah. I was always playing in a lot of those like a lot of fusion bands, a lot of funky music, a lot of Rush style groups. You know, that was like, you know, I remember my friend coming to school in like 7th grade. He had like Rush shaved into his head. You know, we were like Rush fanatics, man. You know, but then, you know, as in high school, I started getting into more of like the experimental side, and like I really enjoyed listening to John Fishman of Fish. He's a really phenomenal drummer, a really phenomenal musician. And also, you know, I listened to a lot of, you know, Dave Matthews Band as well. I mean, that guy, Carter Buford, he might be my favorite drummer of all time, Carter.
Oh,
I mean,
wow.
he is just, and the reason is because it's where he places the notes. It's his pocket, you know, it's so precise. It feels so good the way he plays. And I've been to so many, you know, I remember going to so many Dave Matthews concerts, and I would just stare at him and just, it was love at first sight, man. You know, it's phenomenal playing. So I think I really started to model my drumming after those players, more pocket players. I remember, one of the things that really influenced me actually in high school was I remember going to see to like a master class with the late great Ed Shaughnessy, who was a great big band player. And I remember him, you know, he was doing a lot of records at the time. That was like back when, you know, records were still rolling. And I remember him saying something to the group like, hey, so who practices, you know, over the bar fills and like polyrhythms and like really crazy stuff? And everybody in the audience went, yeah, man, like we're into that shit, you know, or excuse me, you know, we're into that stuff. And, you know,
it's fine.
And I was like, and he turned to everybody, he said, you know, I sit in my house and I put on that click and all I do is practice 2 and 4. And every time I go into that studio and I hit 2 and 4 right to that click, I'm making $500. So you all can go and practice your crazy polyrhythm over the bar fills. I'm going to keep the pocket. I'm going to keep the groove, and I'm going to keep making money. And I was like, damn, like, wow, man, that is an eye opener, you know, like time, you know?
Fascinating.
So that was a big, yeah.
Wow.
Yes, sir.
That's great advice, actually.
Yeah. So that was a big eye opener, you know, because we all grew up in that era of like, oh man, I want to play as many notes as I can. And, you know, which is cool. I mean, that's, you know, but yeah, that's not the way to make money anymore. You can't make money that way.
I found the fewer notes that I play, the more I get paid.
100%. The note to dollar ratio. 100%, man.
Yes, that's the new math, the new drum math.
Yeah.
So you grew up in Los Angeles. You went to college where?
I went to college at USC in California.
Oh, man. When I was in LA in 2018, doing the out-of-town trials not out-of-town trials, but the out-of-town run for Ain't Too Proud, I did a lot of traveling around Los Angeles, and I eventually just I took the train. I didn't realize LA had underground and above ground trains. I'm like, this is like Earthquake Central, and there's like subways in Los Angeles. I'm like, people are taking it, and I did. But you know, I took a train down to USC, and it's massive, man. It's a big place. I didn't get it.
That was a great school.
Now, why USC and not some other school like Berkeley or North Texas State or Juilliard or some other place?
Well, I did get into a lot of schools. Most of the schools that I applied to on the East Coast, I got into. But Well, to tell you the honest truth, I was in love with a girl at the time in California, and I decided to stay in California to be with her. That's the honest truth. And I have a lot of teachers. You know, my high school teacher still chastises me to this day, saying, "Hey, man, you should have gone to New York earlier." I mean, it's fine. It worked out fine, obviously, but you know, I think if I had a better head on my shoulders, then I probably should have just gone to New York. But I went to USC. They were great. You know, it was a good school. I got to study. You know, I got to take drum lessons with Ndugu. You know, that was pretty amazing. I was also, you know, I was in the percussion program, so I got to, you know, I got to play with guys from the LA Phil, Raynard Carroll, and all those cats that were like real, you know, heroes of mine. So it wasn't the end all, but you know, I certainly had my reasons to stay in California.
Now, in the beginning of our conversation, you were mentioning that there were things that you were doing that you saw people playing in the pit. When you were in LA, at what point did you say, you know what, I don't want to stay in LA anymore. I want to go to New York and try the whole Broadway thing?
So what ended up happening was I always knew that I wanted to be in theater. I just didn't know, you know, how I was going to do it, you know, whether performing or playing or whatever. And I met a really good friend of mine in college who is a composer. And after all the cruise ship work that I did a couple of, you know, a couple of contracts on the ships. And I remember my friend, this composer, he started sending me all of these shows that he was doing. And he was like, "Hey man, put a drum part to this, put a drum part to this." So I would just go on Finale. I'd write these really great drum parts for him. And eventually he was like, "You know, I'm doing a bunch of concerts of my music. Will you come out to New York and play these for me?" And I went, "Sure," you know, and he's like, "Come out, you can stay on my couch for a couple of weeks and, you know, you'll play these shows." And I wasn't planning on moving out to New York. I thought I was just coming out for a couple of weeks, but this guy was very well connected in the scene, is well connected in the scene. And he ended up introducing me to so many music directors that all of a sudden I had work for like 3 months. Now, it wasn't necessarily paid work, let's say. You know, I had done enough work on cruise ships that I had some money saved, so I could kind of dick around and not have to worry about, you know, money at the moment, you know, and not have to like get a day job, that I could really just focus on playing as much as possible. And I was playing for like 3 months, and I stayed on his couch, and I told my father, I said, "Well, damn, I guess start sending my stuff out." And my dad sent boxes, you know, you like just send a box of clothes, send a box of finally I was like, "I need my drums, Dad." And he sent my drums, you know, and that's how it started. And I wasn't even moving to New York, and I moved to New York, you know, but the craziest thing, and this is like what made me know that I was doing, or that let me know that I was doing the right thing, is on the third day I was in New York, my friend, this composer told me, he said, he knew a lot of music directors, which is what he was introducing me to. And a lot of these music directors, you know, I had long-term relationships with them, and we can go into that idea of like, you know, because I started working with a lot of these cats, mostly sometimes for free, sometimes for a very little amount of money. But as they got better and as they got more work, they would bring me along, and I became, you know, more prominent in the scene. The one person my friend told me, he said, "Listen, I don't know any musicians here. I know music directors, but you know, because I was going around the city, like putting up signs like, 'Hey, do you need a drummer? Do you need a drummer? Call Josh.'" Like this was like, you know, this was, you know, basic stuff, you know, like I was doing anything I could to get work. And he said, "Listen, if you could get a hold of Gary Seligson, he's the only drummer I know, and maybe you could like talk to him about this stuff," you know? And I was like, I remember I had a book, and like a book of like names, you know, with their numbers, and his was the first name. And I said, "I got to meet this guy. And on the third day I was in the subway with my cymbals. I walk on the subway car, and who's sitting there with his cymbals? Gary. And I go, I didn't know who he was. I didn't know a picture. I didn't have a picture of him. I didn't know, but I turned to him and I said, "Oh, you're on a gig too today, huh?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "I'm Josh." He said, "I'm Gary." I went, "Gary?" And that's how I met Gary. And we ended up going out and chatting. And, he actually hooked me up with Michael Kreuter from Avenue Q so I could go watch him. But that was the beginning of meeting people in the city, and that's when I went, wow, something's going on here. Maybe this is what I'm meant to do.
Gary is like the sun, and everyone revolves around him.
Yes.
But he gives out such great energy.
Yes, all the light.
Yeah, and just talking to him and realizing how many careers he's like launched, including mine.
Absolutely.
To a certain degree. I mean, Matt Beck is really the guy that brought me into this whole thing, but the first person I saw play in a Broadway pit was Gary Seligson at AIDA. He said, "Come on down." I was like, okay. That just shows you, how great of a person he is and how important to this business he is. So
and I think mine was the same. Was Billy Elliot. I think that was the first that I saw as well. He was like, "Hey, come watch me play Billy Elliot."
So, you met Gary, and then he recommended you for other things, or how did?
No, he didn't. He didn't recommend me. No. It took a lot longer than that. He just got me in the scene and kind of pointed me in the right direction. Basically the whole thing is you just got to meet people. You just got to be cool, be a good guy, be fun to be around, and just meet people, and that was the whole thing. And that's, I tell a lot of people, it's like really important when you come out, if you want to do this for a living, to have a little buffer, like I said, because I had some money saved from the cruise ship. So I could spend every waking moment contacting musicians, contacting drummers, trying to meet up with Clayton, that was like my MO, that was my whole thing. That was my whole life. That's what I lived. That's what I did. And that's what you got to do. You got to, because even now, when, we all get called all the time for gigs, and if I can't do a gig, I'm always thinking about, it's almost like a response. Like I always think about the person that I really like last talked to almost, it's almost like, oh yeah, yesterday, this kid called me. He's like new in the city. I'll throw him a bone. I'll throw this to him. So if you're constantly pushing and meeting people and keeping yourself in mind, in their minds, you'll get more work. And that's the job, always emailing, always calling. Now, there's a skill in that, because you don't want to be annoying. It's a people game. It's a people's game. You have to know how to approach people and figure out what pisses them off, what they want. Is it okay if I call Clayton on the phone? Would you rather me email him? Is he giving me vibes that like maybe I should like stop bugging him? Okay, that's cool. Like I won't email him for a little while. You know what I mean? Like you definitely have to like use a lot, your brain,
One of the things that my girlfriend talks about, because she is a career coach, and she talks about how to respond to people in the manner in which they want to be responded to. Like if they say, yes, text me about this or call me or email me, then do that. Because if you say text me back or about this, then you call them, you're like, then they hang up on you. They're like, I told you to text me.
100%.
So it's just like you said, it's a people skills skill that people need to understand and manage. Now, we met through one of the things that you talked about was basically reaching out. How did you start reaching out to drummers on Broadway and percussionists in order to try to break in? What are some of the things that you did?
So I learned very early on that joining the union was a good key. They had a lot of good resources. They had different things. And one of the things that they had that now I think is online, I think everything is online now, but at the time it wasn't. I went to the union and they printed out a packet for me of every single person on Broadway and their instruments. And so I was just able to email every single guy that I knew that they gave me, and just to meet with them. Not, I wasn't trying to hustle for work. I wasn't trying to be, a jerk, or think that I was like all that or anything. I was just trying to meet people, and so that's what I did, and so that was one thing, was like meeting people that way and getting all those resources from 802 and kind of cold calling people. But also another thing that I heard, which this isn't iffy, but to take lessons with some people that you really admire. Now that's tricky, because you never want to put yourself in a situation where somebody feels that they are above you, because, if someone goes to me for a lesson, they're now a student and I'm the teacher, and I'm not looking at them necessarily as equal, which is very important in this business. But at the time I was like, I want to get better with my hand drum stuff. And I knew Doug Hinrichs was doing In the Heights. I love that show. And I'm a big transcriber. I love transcribing. I used to transcribe people's solos. I used to transcribe gab. I used to transcribe musical theater stuff. One of the things I transcribed was In the Heights. I just picked like 5 or 6 tunes that I loved. The salsa number, the opening, the end of Act 1, and I transcribed it. And I brought it to Doug, and I started taking lessons with Doug. And it just so happened that there was an opening at In the Heights, and I was still making the rounds, and there was this other guy named Danny Taylor who was from a similar area of California, and he was doing a show called The Marvelous Wonderettes off-Broadway at the time. And Doug asked Danny to sub for him at In the Heights, and Danny asked Doug. He said, "Well, if I'm going to sub for you, I need to sub for Marvelous Wonderettes. What do I do?" And Doug says, "Well, you know what? There's this student of mine who's good, and why don't you use Josh?" And that was the start. So that was like my first off-Broadway job. And that kind of gave me a little bit of clout, because then when I met you, Clayton, I was at least able to say, "Hey man, I have something. I'm playing off-Broadway at Marvelous Wonderettes." And you were like, "Okay, ding. Like, I'll remember that." And I got very lucky, because you, Clayton, are such a good guy, that when you left Altar Boyz and Mo Roberts took over for you, you actually gave Mo Roberts my name, which got me into New World Stages, which kind of upped my status a little bit in the scene,
How did you prepare to sub at that show?
I am insane when it comes to subbing. I'm very obsessive compulsive. I'm actually obsessive compulsive. Like, I've been diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder. I'm very meticulous, and I have what they call perfectionistic OCD, which means I need to do everything perfectly. So when I sub, when you gave me your book for Altar Boyz, I transcribed the crap out of what you were playing to a T. And I have always done that for any show that I've ever done. And I'll give you a good story about that, because if you don't mind, I'll tell you a story. So doing all this off-Broadway stuff, so the person that really got me into Broadway was Mr. Shannon Ford. He's kind of my mentor. He's in the business. Him and really John Redsecker, who's the drummer of Aladdin. They were really big influences for me. And when Shannon told me that I could sub for him at Godspell, I took months, and I would go to watch him play, and I recorded him several times, and I would analyze the recordings, and I would be able to tell you exactly where he was doing a fill that wasn't that he doesn't do all the time, or fills that he would do all the time. And I basically distinguished a track of a perfect take of him doing stuff that he always does and stuff that he does sometimes. And I transcribed that to a T. Now, and when I would practice that for months, I had, the ultraphones. I practiced with the ultraphones, so I couldn't really hear my drums. I would just be hearing his mix, right? So I'm practicing, and I'm literally practicing to his mix, listening to him playing, and I'm playing, and I'm practicing. And when I first did the show, and I'm listening, now I put on his mix, right? Because I practiced to his mix. But when we started the hit and I started playing, my first thought was, my God, Shannon sounds good. Because what I was hearing was exactly what I had been practicing to. It was literally like, I have been hearing it, and then I'm playing it, but I'm still hearing exactly the same thing that I've been practicing to. And like, that was the key. Nobody knew that it wasn't Shannon to a T. You know what I mean? And like, I think that's where I excelled, because I think no one's as crazy as that. Like, I would sit for a half an hour on 5 seconds of music. 5 seconds of music, I'd sit for a half an hour. Now, do I think that's really necessary now, knowing? Maybe that's a little extreme, because now I have a little bit of a different approach, because now I've held my own chair, and I've seen subs come in for Shannon, and I've seen what are great subs and what are not so great subs. And oftentimes maybe the amount of work that I put in for 5 seconds was a little extreme, because maybe that doesn't really matter per se, those 5 seconds, but the fact that I spent so much time on it helped me in the long run, helped me be a better player. So, when I look at sometimes people will come in and they'll play exactly what Shannon was playing, but they don't sound like him, or they don't sound as good. And I'm like, oh, that's not really it. Or they'll come in and they'll play their own thing, and kind of they're playing what Shannon does, but they're so in the pocket, they know the show so well that I'm like, that's it. So maybe it's a combination of playing what the player does, but also knowing the show so intrinsically, and so maybe that was also a big part of it, was listening to the show a million times, besides transcribing those 5 seconds. I'm pretty sure those 5 seconds didn't really make a difference,
If you like what you hear on the show, subscribe to the Broadway Drumming 101 newsletter at broadwaydrumming101.substack.com. That's Substack, substack.com. The Broadway Drumming 101 newsletter is your one-stop shop for everything you'll need to know about playing drums for Broadway musicals. When you subscribe to the newsletter, you'll learn about what it takes to be a successful pit musician, with content delivered directly to your email inbox 2 to 3 times a week. For $5 a month or $50 a year, you'll have a backstage pass to the world of a Broadway drummer playing on a hit show. As a paying subscriber, you'll receive behind-the-scenes access to the life of a musician who makes a living on Broadway. You'll also be able to read every post, not just those occasional free ones. You'll get access to all newsletter issues in the archives, and have an ability to participate in subscriber-only comments and events. If you become a founding member for a gift of only $75, you'll receive discounted private drum lessons, an opportunity to watch Clayton play in the pit of his show, and a 25% discount on future promotional products. If you'd like to make a direct contribution to the production of this show, you can reach us at Venmo at Clayton-Craddock, Cash App at Syncopated, that's CINCOPATED, or PayPal at Clayton Craddock. Any amount of support will be appreciated. Thank you for listening.
So since you're a perfectionist, when you subbed your first show, did you get notes? And if you did, how did you take those notes? Did you take it personally, or were you like, I did it perfectly? What are you talking about?
Sometimes it's very difficult for me to get notes. I don't ever show that I'm maybe a little bit frustrated when I get notes, because I try to be so perfect. And if somebody says, "Hey, that wasn't perfect," that really like gets under my skin, especially if it was perfect and they're saying something that I don't necessarily agree with. But at the end of the day, that's not my call. That is not my job. I'm not there to say anything other than do my job. So if somebody comes up to me and they say, "Hey man, your kick drum wasn't playing on beat 4," and I'm thinking, "No way, man, kick drum was playing on beat 4." But I don't say that. I just go, "Absolutely, man, I will play the kick drum on beat 4 next time," because what am I going to gain? It's not my job, and I think I got very lucky because I kind of like learned that early on, to kind of just like keep your mouth shut, that it's not that you can't, I used to get like very frustrated because like, especially in the beginning when somebody would come in, we'd be playing at like I'd be doing a small hit at like some club, like with like 100 people, and somebody be like, "Yo man, the drums are too loud. Can you play with blast sticks?" And I'd be like, that would get under my skin so much, because I'd think, you wouldn't ask a saxophone player to play with a different reed. You wouldn't ask those things. Like, just tell me to play softer. And in the beginning, I might have stood up and been like, "No, man, I'm going to play with sticks. Just tell me to play softer." But very quickly, I realized, hey, man, like, that's not the game. It's not my job. Yeah, does it feel better to me to play with sticks? Of course. But if the guy in the front who's paying my check wants me to play it with, blast sticks or brushes, I'll play it with blast sticks or brushes. Fine. That's what you got to do. That's the job. So sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Go ahead. Finish what you were saying.
So I did get notes. Charlie was the music director. Charlie Alterman was the music director for Godspell, and he's also a very big perfectionist and wants very specific things. So he did have some notes for me. A lot, maybe some volume things and some, and that was fine, and I was just, I just nod my head. Whatever Charlie said reigned, that's the game.
Did you go from one off-Broadway show with, you started out with the Marvelous Wonderettes. Did you go from that to another off-Broadway, or was it to Godspell?
Those two were basically the beginning shows. And then it was, I was doing that for maybe a year or two before I met Shannon for Godspell. I happened to be, I think I got a little bit lucky, because I think it was a little bit fast for me. I moved to New York in 2008, and I subbed for Shannon in 2011, which is pretty quick. That's a pretty quick turnaround. But I got very lucky with Shannon, because it just so happened that I was working with so many people that that summer of Godspell, when I met Shannon, I was able to tell him, Shannon was, after Damien, he was the drummer for Next to Normal. And it just so happened that summer I was playing with every single band member from Next to Normal in some capacity. I was playing with the guitarist with this group. I was playing with the bass player in this group. I was playing with this singer. So they all knew me in all these different capacities. So it was very easy for me to go to Shannon and say, "Listen, Shannon, like, your Next to Normal family, who you're very close with, all you have to do is call any one of those people and they'll tell you my skill level and my capacity and what I can do." And so that was a huge step for me, because he had no idea who I was or what I was capable of. But because I networked accordingly and knew all the people that he knew, they were able to vouch for me.
So speaking of networking, let's go back to 2008. I left Altar Boyz in 2009. Man, that's a pretty quick. So when did you start Marvelous Wonderettes?
Marvelous Wonderettes was probably 2009. It was right around probably a little bit before you left. I remember it being pretty quick.
Wow. So
Yeah.
Tell everybody, I mean, you remember how we met. I just remember you reaching out to me, and then we went to dinner someplace in like on 9th Avenue, something like that. And, you know, we just had a great conversation, and just like we're doing now. And, you know, you get a general feel for somebody when you meet face to face with them. And, you know, like you talked about, some people want to take lessons. Some people just want to meet just to hang out. And some people just like, you know, let's meet because I just want a gig. And, you know, I didn't see that from you at all as far as just, you know, just meeting just to get a gig. I just knew that you were just eager to get into the scene, and, you know, just having a great vibe and us connecting on a personal level it really, you know, struck me. So the reason why you're so successful now is because you have a personality, and of course you have a skill set that allows you to do this kind of work. But we met, and I referred you to Mo, and you wound up going to Altar Boyz, but you did a whole bunch of other things in addition to, you know, Altar Boyz and the Marvelous Wonderettes, like Heathers and Carrie and Sisters Follies. You know, was that all coming together at one certain time period, or how did all those shows work out? Was it over a series of years?
It was. Well, when I played Godspell, I think, you know, our communities really, let me just go back to before we talk about this, you know, I think part of the attitude, Clayton, is that, like, I think you're right. I think when somebody is coming to you and they just want a job, I think that's very apparent. But for someone like me who was obsessed with theater, I just wanted to meet you. Like you know, you're like, you know, people who played on Broadway were like idols of mine. The fact that you played at New World Stages, that was like, it was like meeting like a superstar. You know what I mean? So like that was my attitude.
Then you met me and you're like, this dude.
but you know what I mean? Like that. So, you know, and so there is different approaches, because like, I know that, you know, a lot of people are gunning for these Broadway gigs because it's like the main gig, but like, that's not, you know, there's so many other factors. Like you can't just do it because it's the gig in town. Like you have to really want this. Like you have to really, especially now, you know, because there's so many things that happen. I mean, you get kicked all the time, you know, like New York will screw you. Like it is so hard, you know? And I mean, there have been times, you know, I won the Radio City Heart and Light show in 2014. And that was like a big break. And Harvey Weinstein pulled the plug the day before opening, you know? And there were people in that orchestra. There are trumpet players that I knew that gave up performing because that was such a big letdown. Because Think about it. I mean, they had canceled their entire workload for the summer to do this show. Show's canceled, and they were screwed. And they were like, this business is way too hard. I'm going to go teach. You know, it is way too difficult. You know, like you have to like want this with all your heart, you know, and that's because you have to be able to pick yourself up. Otherwise you're just going to be like, screw this. It's way too difficult. But yeah, to go back to Godspell. So after, you know, our community is like real small, you know, much smaller than I think people think. And I think because I was so obsessive about doing it perfectly like Shannon, I think word got out pretty quickly, because then, I ended up doing Jersey Boys. I ended up subbing Jersey Boys on Broadway. I ended up, it was strange because I subbed Jersey Boys on Broadway on a Friday night. Saturday morning at 6 a.m. It was Saturday morning at 6 a.m. I got a call from John Miller saying, hey, the drummer on the tour hurt his leg. Can you fly out there today and play the show tonight? I went, sure. You know, and that's another thing that I talk about too. Like when I go to these, like, you know, when I do these like master classes around the country and stuff, it's just being prepared to just do that. You know, I mean, if I had dog or a kid at the time, like there's no way I would have been able to say, yeah, just get up and go, you know, but you got to like make your sacrifices, you know? So that was huge. I started working for Miller. You know, John Redsucker referred me to the Anything Goes tour, started doing the Anything Goes tour. And then it was kind of, what happened was I heard about Radio City in 2013 and I was on the Anything Goes tour and I went, oh, I'll just take it. And I ended up winning that audition, leaving the tour early to come back. And that was kind of like, that was, you know, the beginning of my career.
So tell me about Radio City. I only time I have, you know, had any kind of contact with the whole Radio City scene was when I went. It was in 2006. I was going to sub for Buddy Williams at the First Color Purple, so I got the book and I was learning it, and I reached out to Tom Oldakowski to possibly sub for him. He said, "Just come on down and check it out." So I went to watch him play, and on this big gigantic riser, we're going up and down, and then you see, and when you're backstage, when everything's closed, you see, and I said this on the podcast before, you see little people, you see animals, you see figure skating, you see people. I'm like, there's this a cacophony of stuff going around, but then when the curtain opens, it all works. Then, you know, you're going up and down, and then I had to listen to the recording of Tom Oldakowski, and the measure counts 136, 137, 138, 139, and then it's like 140, 141, 42, 143. I'm like, oh my God, this is the most insane thing I've ever heard. And then I'm like, okay, should I listen to Color Purple? And it's like grooving like this. I'm like, oh, that's what I'm going to be doing. But I'm glad I did it because it's such a different thing. Just like doing Broadway is different than doing a regular gig. It requires a certain skill. So tell me about Radio City.
That's 100% right, Clayton. You know, and it's interesting because people don't, you know, I know a lot of great drummers that haven't succeeded on Broadway, that have actually gotten fired and stuff, because it is people don't realize it's a whole different ballgame, you know, and there's different kinds of shows. There's shows like your show, Ain't Too Proud, that's a groove show that's different than, let's say, a dance show, you know, or like more of a like an Anything Goes kind of dance show, you know, where there's like all these dance hits and stuff. There's like different or different than Radio City, where you're playing with the Rockettes, you know. Also, I think that's an actual person who's doing 140, 141. 142. That's actually someone sitting there with a microphone, or he's recording.
Oh my God, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
It's very funny. So Radio City is like it's wild, man. It's wild. It's a wild ride, that gig. You know, they hold auditions every year for the chairs, which I think is wonderful because, you know, I got really into the business because I won that chair. And I think that a lot of people have as well. And I, you know, most of the jobs that, you know, on Broadway are not audition, you know, you just kind of, you know, you got to work your way around and know the people, and they ask you. So this is a nice opportunity for people to show their skill and to try to get in when they don't really know a lot of people. So I always try to encourage people to, you know, take the audition. It's hard to get an audition because I know they only listen to maybe 15 or 20 people for each instrument, you know, so they're really looking for people who have this kind of theater experience. But yeah, I mean, when I won that chair, man, I was like, first of all, I was freaking out because I was on the road and I knew that the percussion book was all Malacat, and Mario DeCutis, who created the Malacat. He's the owner of Alternate Mode. He's the percussionist at Radio City, or he was. He just retired this last year. But I knew that I was playing, you know, all the stuff on a Malacat, and I'd never played on a Malacat before. So what I did was I basically got cardboard in my room and I drew a Malacat, and I would just practice playing on these Malacats because, you know, you have to play things like shaker and tambourine and sleigh bells and mark tree all on this Malacat. You know, there's like stacks of cats. We have like one cat for maybe, xylophone and bells and vibes. And then there's another stack on top that has like the entire row, 5 octaves of sound effects, and they're all labeled, but, I wanted to make sure that I was the perfectionist, the OCD person that I am. I wanted to make sure that I was going to nail it when I went into that orchestra room. And so I knew that, I marked everything just like how Mario has it. So I was able to practice, okay, shakers here, triangles here. Oh, there's 3 different triangles here. Okay. Yeah.
So let me just go back. You auditioned for the percussion chair or for the drum chair or for both?
So back in 2013, Tom Oldakowski still had the drum chair. He didn't leave until 2015, I think, maybe 2016. And I ended up actually starting to sub for Tom on the drums, because when I won the percussion chair the second time, I think it was in 2015, Tom came up to me in rehearsals and went, "Hey man, I need another sub. You've won this chair twice. You want to check it out? I know you play kit." I went, "Absolutely, man. I'm all about it."
So you had the percussion chair and then you started subbing for the drum chair?
Correct.
You can do that.
Yeah, I got very, there was not a lot of drum, there weren't a lot of people that were playing drums. And I think they felt very secure knowing that a cover was there who was always there on percussion, in case, God forbid, anything were to happen to Tom and they couldn't get a sub in, I was there, and I could play it.
Do you have to audition every year too?
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. Everybody does. Now, there are some years, there have been certain years in the past where they take people, the Radio City has a very strange contract. It's a very different contract than Broadway, mostly because there was a strike when it was a regular orchestra. I think 2003 or 2005. Anyway, the musicians went on strike, and I guess we thought that it would be effective, and it wasn't, unfortunately. And we all had to kind of go crawling back to Radio City, begging for our jobs back. And Radio City was like, "Fine, we're going to make this an audition-based orchestra. We're going to fire half of you guys, and we're going to continue to fire all the members of the orchestra every year until it's an all audition-based orchestra." So that's why, in 2013, I auditioned. When I auditioned in 2013, there was a pool of about maybe 25 musicians that had been in the orchestra, from years past. And every year they would kind of just get rid of a couple. That's terrible. That's terrible. But also, it's like, it's helped people like me. It's helped a lot of people. Now it's an audition-based orchestra, and everybody has a chance. Everybody has a shot. It's not just like you have this gig and then, well, that gig's taken by so-and-so for the rest of his life,
Well, I got a question about that. So say, for instance, I'm 20 years old and I can play and I want to play in Radio City. I don't know anybody. I go in there and audition and I get the gig. It's different from you going in, or Shannon, or a lot of people that know a whole bunch of other people. Now I get the gig. I got to find subs. Just like,
Yes.
Any other.
That's right.
Yeah, but you happen to know people that actually could do this since you've done it before.
Yes. Well, fortunately, so here's the thing. So at Radio City, when you win a chair, it's a split chair. There are so many shows at Radio City. There's usually over 200 shows in a season, which is like 2 months. There are so many shows that they make every chair a split chair. So you split the chair, all the shows, with another person. So if there's 200 shows, you're playing 100. So usually, I've never really seen 2 really green people win the chair. But also, they're not going to have somebody who's really green come and audition. It's just not going to happen. Because, I mean, they might, but, you got to send in your resume. You have to.
Okay.
You send in your resume and then they pick 15 or 20 people to audition. So, like, really, you have to be sort of seasoned, or they at least have to know that if you win the gig, that they're going to be able to trust you to do the job accordingly, get subs and stuff. But even if there was someone green who didn't know a lot of people, they're usually going to be paired with somebody who knows the business, and they can kind of like for instance, when I won the chair in 2013, I didn't know a lot of people either. Fortunately, I got paired with Dave Roth. And so, I mean, Dave Roth is like the king of percussion. So, so he knew everybody and everything. And he just basically took the reins. And I was like, man, I have no idea what I'm doing. Tell me what to do. He's like, we're going to do this. We're going to get these subs because they played at Radio City before and this. And I went, great, Dave. Fantastic. Awesome. All right. You know, like.
So you were doing the percussion chair at Radio City for a while, and then did you ever get the drum chair or have the drum chair?
So I've never had the drum chair for the Christmas show, but I've won the drum chair twice for other Rockette shows that they've had in other years. Sorry, not twice. Once. I won. So I've won the percussion chair at Radio City twice, and then I won a percussion chair for Heart and Lights, that's the show that Harvey Weinstein came and pulled the plug. And then there was, in 2016, there was the New York Spectacular, and I won the drum chair for that. Wow. So that was really nice.
How many shows was that?
So that was over a summer. We probably did, 100 shows. It was probably like 12 or 13 a week.
Damn. How many? 12.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. I mean, they're 90-minute shows, so it's not terrible because you could do like, at Radio City, I mean, we'll do like 5 shows a day during Christmas time at Radio City. There's 5-6 shows a day. It's crazy, Clayton.
It's
absolutely. I've done the most I've done is 4. I can't. You can't function. You can't function.
Wait, so if you do 4 shows a day, do you split everything with the other drummer? Like, how does that work out with the other drummer? Like, how do you both get equal amounts of work?
So normally, let's say there's like 28 shows in a week. Let's say one week has 28 shows. We'll both get 14 shows. And oftentimes what'll happen is, you kind of want to have like days off. At least that's the way I do it. So I'll be like, hey, listen, I'm just going to take every show on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, and you take every show on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and we'll just,
Well, is that something that the 2 drummers or 2 percussionists agree on, or is it something
right.
that...
Right. So like, yeah. So, you could do it however you want. You could say, oh, okay, I'll play the 11 o'clock. You play the 2 o'clock. I'll play the 5 o'clock and you play the 8 o'clock. It's just, you just split it up evenly. And then, you put your list in, and so then they at least know who's going to be there when, Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So training subs for Broadway is different than training subs for Radio City, I'm sure.
Big time.
How do you, because I know subbing is very, very difficult. Like I said on this podcast before, I can't remember who said this. It was probably one of my subs who said subbing on a Broadway show is like a 2.5-hour heart attack because it's very stressful and you have to get it right. And you got to keep your eye on the conductor and try to look at the music, but keep your eye on the conductor because that's, your lifeline. But subbing at Radio City with that click track and the guy speaking and then everything going around, how do you train somebody to be prepared to sub at Radio City? So
most of the time at Radio City, whenever I've gotten the chair, I try to get people who won the chair. That's kind of how the MO is there. Because, let's say 15 guys audition. Probably 5 of those guys have held the chair before, and whoever really wins the chair, then they know those other 5 guys are going to sub because it's just, first of all, it's too difficult. It's the shows are it's too compact a schedule to actually train someone new. I have seen it done, but it's also hard because you don't sub out that much, and I'm not going to have somebody learn a show, kill themselves for 3 shows. That's not right. So it's usually people who have learned the book before, because it's usually the same book. It's usually, every year they'll change maybe 5 minutes of music. So 5 minutes of music out of 90, it's just different. So it's usually the same people over and over and over again to sub, really, and I have seen new people come in. I don't really like to do that because, like I said, because it's not really fair. It's not fair to do that to somebody. It's, because it's not like a Broadway show. But you mentioned something very interesting, Clayton, about locking in with the conductor. And I find that to be something on the forefront of subbing is staring at the conductor no matter what, because they're the ones that are giving you the job. I mean, you've already gotten the job from the drummer. So now how are you going to make the conductor feel good? And the way that you're going to make anybody feel good in any situation is to lock in with them and to make them feel like you are on their side. The worst thing you can do as a drummer in a subbing situation is not look up and have the conductor be scared because they're thinking that you're going to miss something. You are never going to be welcome back, even if you play a great show, because you're not making them feel comfortable. So I learned early on, I heard, always memorize the first 3 tunes. And so I normally memorize the first 3 tunes. So all I'm doing is looking at the conductor, and there's also, sometimes conductors aren't actually conductors, because sometimes conductors are keyboard players. Maybe they're a sub. Maybe they're not great conductors because maybe they're keyboard players that just got promoted to, conducting or whatever. Oftentimes that doesn't happen. And I don't really see that very much, and it doesn't really happen very much on Broadway, but certainly in the past, I have had to, there's a game that goes on when you're playing drums with the conductor sometimes where you have to, it's not pretend, but if a conductor doesn't really know what they're doing, you kind of have to make them comfortable while actually being in control of the situation. You know what I mean? They may be looking at you to move faster, but maybe that's not actually what they want. And once you start moving faster, they go, whoa, 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 that's not what I want. Because maybe they're not so trained in that. And so there's a bigger picture of knowing what the music needs, knowing what the theater needs, knowing what the show needs, knowing how to make the conductor feel comfortable and putting it where it's supposed to be, and taking cues as much as possible. And maybe even nodding your head when a conductor's looking at you doing something and maybe you don't change a thing, but you're nodding your head and they're going, right on, right on. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And that's why great drummers can fail, because there is so much more going on besides just playing the music or playing a groove. It's such a bigger picture, that you really have to know what you're getting yourself into when you go and sit down, especially on the drum chair. That's the hot seat, and you really have to be a specific kind of person to do that, I believe,
Well, you've wound up doing a bunch of different subbing. You wound up doing a bunch of different shows as a sub, like Chaplin. I guess you were subbing for Shannon Ford again.
Yes, sir.
Nice work if you can get it.
Yes.
And who was the drummer on? John Redsucker.
That was John Redsucker. That was after Eric Poland left. And John Redsucker took it over, and I was able to play for John.
What is on the 20th Century? I haven't heard of that one.
So that was a show that was conducted by Kevin Stites, who was the conductor of Radio City for the past 7 years. And I ended up having a very good rapport with him, so much so that when this guy, Eric, who's sort of, he's well connected, but I think that was his first show and he didn't have, his first Broadway show. He had done I believe Les Mis, and he had done the Les Mis tour, and he had done a lot of stuff with Kevin. But that was a circumstance where I was recommended by Kevin, which is something that maybe we could talk about as well, with the idea that really conductors are now picking subs as opposed to the drummers themselves. Oftentimes now, which, is good and bad.
Yeah, you can pick your subs, but when they don't make the conductor comfortable, they're not going to be asked back.
Right.
Especially if they can't take notes.
100%.
And they're like, no, I did it that way. It's like, no,
right.
Doesn't matter what you thought you did, even though you might be right.
Right. That's probably the worst thing. My friend Peter Saleh, he always has an expression. He says, is it better to be right or effective? I always think about that, man. Like, you could be right till the day's end. You want a job? Be effective. Do the job. Say yes. Fix it. Make sure it's right or whatever it is the next time, and make sure they know that you're doing it so that you could correct it and they feel comfortable. 100%.
There's a saying also: do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? Same thing. Effective, happy. You can be right all you want. But like Peter said, you can be effective, and effective and happy are somewhat synonymous. I mean, they kind of go hand in hand, because you want to be happy by getting asked back and getting that money and getting the opportunity to work with these great musicians, and then getting other opportunities to work on other shows and hopefully get your own show, because you went from subbing at Chaplin, nice work if you can get it, on the 20th Century, A Bronx Tale, Jersey Boys, Sunset Boulevard, Miss Saigon, yes. Aladdin. Mm-hmm. And then I remember seeing or hearing that you got your first show, and I was so happy for you. Trust me, I'm happy when I see other drummers and percussionists get their own show, because I know what it's like having a show, especially having a show that runs for a long time. It's a wonderful thing. So I'm like, congratulations. You got Beetlejuice.
Yes, sir.
Was that not only because you're just a great human being and a great musician, but how did you get into that show?
I think it seemed like all of the stars kind of lined up for that show in particular, because I had been working for Howie Joines, who was the contractor of Beetlejuice, for a long time. I did the Aladdin tour for him. I subbed at Aladdin. He's the contractor at Radio City. He knows my playing very, very well. I would say I work for him more than I work for any other conductor. And it just so happened that Shannon Ford, who, my close friend, mentor, and guy who gave me my first shot, was the drummer. And it just lined up really well. Shannon was in, they were working on Beetlejuice in DC. I happened to be going down to DC to do a show down there. I was doing something at the Kennedy Center. And, I called Shannon. I said, man, you're in DC, let's hang. He said, oh, I'm doing Beetlejuice, this show. Why don't you come over and meet the music director at this, we're going to be hanging out at this bar. So I went, I met the music director. That was really cool, and I think it just kind of lined up, because when they were looking for a percussionist, I think it was very easy for Shannon to be like, hey man, Josh is going to kill it. And then for Howie to be like, oh yeah, Josh already works for me. At least that's how I think, how it lined up, because everybody knew me. It probably wasn't that difficult of a decision. I mean, I know they had a lot of people to consider, but, with Shannon gunning for me, for Howie there, because the music director, Chris, didn't know me, but, with so many people on my side, being like, listen, man, this is the cat you want. This is the person that you want. So I was very fortunate to have those kinds of endorsements, because it's not an audition, it's not a, and I think I'm very honored. Our business is so amazing, man, because our community is so wonderful. I feel like we're always trying to help each other, and especially because since our community is so small, and that's so advantageous. I always hear for the Radio City audition, John Berger wrote me yesterday, John Berger, and he was like, man, I love going there, and there's just no competitive vibes. Everybody's just there. We all know we're all gunning for the same job, but it's at the end of the day, this is a 2-month gig, and it's not it doesn't help me to try to sabotage or be an asshole or whatever it is in the long run. It doesn't help it. So, I have no problem. For instance, a lot of people wrote me about the Radio City audition because I've won it a lot. I've won it several times, and I could easily be a jerk about it and be like, no, I want to win this job. I'm not going to tell anybody. I'm not going to help anybody. But that's not the attitude to have, because in the long game, that's not going to help. So someone writes me, they say, hey man, this passage doesn't make sense. I don't really understand it. And I'll tell them, I'll be like, this is what you should do. This is what I think. And I'm honest with them because the best person's going to get the job at the end of the day. Nothing I say, I could help you out as much as you want. You're the one that's going to be playing it, so I don't have a problem with that. I don't understand the whole, like, trying to like be sneaky or undermine people. That's just not going to work in our business, man.
Now, I know that the auditions recently happened at Radio City. Do you know anything about what's going on?
No, nothing. We'll probably hear something, something this week, I'm sure. Probably.
Okay.
They usually, the information usually comes out, the week after. So we'll see.
Is it like a thing where, you go to a door and you see your name and a report card and you find out I got the gig?
Well, I don't know. Sometimes, in the past they've called sometimes, and sometimes it's been an email.
Oh, wow.
So I don't know. I just like sit by my phone and stare at it, praying for the call, man.
All right. A couple other questions for you. What's the hardest show, or what's the most difficult show that you've ever subbed on? And why?
Wow. There's so many, because they're all just so difficult in their own regard. There's so many challenges. Each show presented itself its own challenge. Chaplin was so difficult, and Shannon, that book was so hard. And I remember there were things like you had to play like woodblock with your left foot while doing xylophone runs. And I remember at the end of the show, you had to tune the timpani while playing a drum groove. I had to play a bass drum groove with my left foot while tuning a timpani with my right. That was incredibly difficult. And Shannon, I was like, Shannon, you are just a master, man. He is just an absolute master. But, that's different than, like, let's say Miss Saigon. When I subbed for Miss Saigon for Ray, that was a very difficult show because
Ray Marchica, for those people that don't know.
Ray Marchica, who's also a master, they were in a completely separate room, in a back room. And that was difficult because, certain conductors do things a certain way. And that orchestra actually did the kind of thing where, like, they would play like how an orchestra plays, where they put it a little bit behind the beat. When the conductor goes down, it's like not right with the conductor, which is fine. But as a sub, it's really difficult to know, especially as a drummer, when there's no click, where you're going to place the your hits. And so that was also really difficult, especially because there was a little bit of latency on the monitors. So couple the latency with the monitors with the fact that that we're all putting it a little bit behind where the stick is going down. That was a very difficult situation because that was just, you had to use your ears. You just had to use your ears and watch like a hawk. And that was James. I'm blanking on his name. That the conductor, who's a phenomenal conductor. And so I just had to really stay on him. But I think probably the most difficult, to be honest, the most difficult show for me was probably the easiest to play, which was Jersey Boys. Jersey Boys is a very, very simple show. And because it was so simple, it can be very difficult and you can space out. And that was one of the hardest things, especially when it's like, so it's all like, it's like, big girls don't walk like a man. They're all just like doing gun.
Oh, okay, okay.
For like 450 measures.
I thought there was a medley there. I'm like,
no. I'm just saying, like, for 450 measures, you're going bunk, gun, gung, 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 gung. But you better hit that crash cymbal on measure 325. Don't zone out enough. So like that was very difficult because it's hard to be engaged, and especially because the drums were on stage and the drums were moving around the stage, just like, and because of that, you have to play differently, because if a singer's standing right next to the kid, I can't blast. I got to be very sensitive to where I am on stage. So not only am I having to be really engaged because, the music is so simple that I could just zone out, but I also have to be really engaged because I'm moving around. I have to this guy's microphone's right there. I better play accordingly, And so that was a very difficult thing, just to also it had to be memorized. I'm not very good at the whole memorize it thing, because I like looking at the paper. I love that, that's like my lifeline. So that was hard too.
I usually ask, you kind of covered a lot of the questions I was going to ask you as far as what, kind of things a drummer should always do in a pit. Basically watch a conductor, focus.
And time, man, time is so key. That's like the most important. I see, and I feel like there's this school of thought now at a lot of conservatories and stuff, where time is like secondary. It's all about sound. And I think it's the opposite. I think time is first, sound is second. Sound will come. You got to study, you got to, work on your ears and getting the sound that you want to hear yourself. But man, time is the most important thing, especially in these pit shows, man. And I remember one time I went to Sister Act and I was watching Rich Mercurio play. That man, he was playing this song and I was sitting watching him the whole time. And all of a sudden, it kind of gets a little quiet and he stops playing and I hear a click start. And I'm going, oh man, Rich, that's so weird. When did the click start? Did it just start? He's like, no, man, the click's been on in the beginning. That guy covered the click so well. I had no idea it was on the entire song. I went, that is what I'm aiming for. 100%. That is what I'm aiming for. That's the key. That was amazing, man. I was just blown away. It's blown away.
Do you have endorsements with any drum manufacturers at all?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I'm with Vic Firth and I'm with Sabian. I also really like this other small company called Treehouse. They make drums out of their home. They might have a shop now, but they make really great drums. I have a hip gig from them. So I also use their gear a lot as well.
I have to check that company out. How'd you find out about them?
That was early on. A friend, actually, Danny Taylor, I think, got me involved. Him and a couple other guys got me involved with them, and they ended up, when I was on the tour with Anything Goes, they ended up sending me some kits to just try on the road, some hip gigs to try with rehearsals, and I would kind of talk to them about the gear and oh, I like this strainer, I don't like this strainer, let's try this, and they'd send me stuff, and that was very cool. And Sabian was wild because when I was 12, this is a little embarrassing, but my mother, she was big on me modeling when I was a kid, and I couldn't stand it, but I did it all the time. I would model for Guess and Gap and at the malls and stuff, as this little kid, 10, 11 years old. But I actually I did a Sabian shoot for Modern Drummer. I don't know where it is. I don't know where. I have the picture somewhere, but it was I was on a drum set, and they took a couple pictures of me, and then it was interesting because then they had 150 cymbal shoot right after my shoot, and I walked into this giant warehouse, and there was just thousands of cymbals laid out all over the floor, and they just turned to me and they went, "Go ahead, take whatever you want." And I went, "What?" Really? And so, of course, I think back to that time. I'm like, man, I the dirtiest. Like I found like a 24-inch giant metal ride that was like this thick. And like, I picked cymbals that were like, you know, like totally out, you know, I would never use now, but when I contacted Sabian, I was like, hey, you know, now I'm a Broadway drummer and I actually modeled for you guys in a magazine. You know, they were like, all right, come on in, Josh.
That's great, man. I'd love to see that. So I guess since you're waiting for word for Radio City, you're going to go back to modeling again. That's what I hear. And
yes, that's right. That's exactly what people want to see.
You're going to have your own line of clothing, you know. Yeah. You know, we should invent drumming clothing, you know, clothing specific for drummers.
Wait, they had like a drummer shirt.
Really?
That produced different sounds and you could like play it. They had that. That was like 5 years. I remember seeing that. Obviously, it didn't catch on.
Oh, man, that's funny. Well, one last thing. How can people find you on social media? Do you have a website?
Yep. You can find me at joshuamarksamuels.com. That's my website. You could, you know, anybody can contact me. You can look up all my info on my website. You know, I'm on Facebook, Joshua Mark Samuels. And, you know, I talk to people all the time, man. You know, I'm more than happy to talk to everybody and anyone about any of this stuff because, you know, I'm going to be working for them one day, you know?
Well, I wish you well. I hope you get this Radio City. I hope Beetlejuice comes back.
Thank you, brother.
And I'm looking forward to that, the new line of clothing, the modeling spread that comes out.
Yes,
Joshua
sir.
Mark.
Yes, sir. I'm gonna have to send you a picture to put with this podcast. You know, a picture of me on the drum set. Oh my goodness.
Yes, man. It was
I'm
great.
never gonna live this down. Now everybody in the community is gonna know that I did this.
Man, you know, you should just do a new one. Just do you behind a drum set. 2021 style, man. Just model your own thing, man.
Yeah, you're right.
Anyway, it was great talking to you. You have so many, you know, so many words of wisdom, and I hope people learned a lot from this podcast. And looking forward to actually seeing you in person and going out to dinner like we did in 2008, whatever year it was.
Absolutely, Clayton. Absolutely.
Thanks again, and we will definitely talk soon.
Thank you, brother. Talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening to the Broadway Drumming 101 podcast. Head over to the Broadway Drumming 101 YouTube page where you'll find unedited conversations that I've had with some of your favorite musicians. On the YouTube page, you're going to find bonus content that I don't feature on my Instagram page or here on the podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and click on that little bell at the top so that you'll be notified when a new video is uploaded. Thank you for listening and stay tuned for more.